Well, I'm happy to be here. Nice to meet you all. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself to some of you. Anybody at the Roxy last night? I recognize you. And then I spoke to a wildlife class today that one of you may have been in. I'm going to kind of just throw out the Roxy theater program tonight. We can maybe go through a fairly good clip and just interrupt, ask questions as we go if you want. I'm in town too, selfishly, to promote my memoir, in case you want a good read. And it is a memoir, and it kind of approaches my story as a student. Grew up in Iowa as a hunter and a trapper and a young man that wanted to be a wildlife biologist. And so the book is entitled Wolfer, and it's not all about wolves. So don't get the idea that if you pick it up, you're going to be going through a lot of tedium. It's a lot of stories, a lot of adventure. There's a story in there about giving a porcupine an enema. That's kind of a teaser for you if you're interested. And so anyway, that brought us to town, and then we've been doing a lot of presentations. Anybody have any idea of my background at all or who I am? I'll give you a quick introduction. I got my master's and bachelor's degrees at Iowa State University, so don't hold that against me. It's a really good wildlife school, by the way. And I left Iowa right out of graduate school, went to work for the Montana Department of Livestock as a state trapper on a rabies suppression project up, you heard of Plentywood? And anyway, I worked up Plentywood, then I took a temporary job trapping for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Miles City, radio collaring bobcats. Then I moved from there to Dillon, Montana, where I trapped for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and helped remove, over an 8-year period, nearly 500 golden eagles that were preying on sheep down there at that time. And a lot of people don't even know that happened because it was kind of kept low-key, and I'm meeting raptor specialists today who say, golly, I didn't know they did that. And so, and those stories are in the book. And then I became a district supervisor for Wildlife Services, the predator control branch. It was under Interior, then it moved under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I supervised about, off and on, a dozen government trappers in the western half of Montana, and was responsible for black bear, mountain lion, grizzly bear, and eventually wolf damage to livestock. 1989, they appointed me to become the first and only wolf management specialist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the Northern Rockies region to deal specifically with wolf damage. And so for 10 years, up until 2000, I lived out of a pickup truck, 724, covering the state of Montana at the beginning, and then eventually after the wolf reintroduction, I was also responsible for dead livestock in Idaho and Wyoming. And so I ran all over the country, and where livestock was documented to be killed by wolves, I became the foothold trapper and eventually the helicopter capture specialist to remove a lot of these problem wolves. And either, most of them we relocated for a long time and then started to eventually kill them as they got more abundant. In 2000, I went to Idaho. They needed a wolf recovery coordinator for the Idaho Wolf Recovery Program under the Fish and Wildlife Service. I took that job there, and I retired from that in 2006. And for the last 5 summers, I've been a wolf trapper for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, still putting radio collars on wolves. And so I've got between 25 and 30 years of experience, and a lot of that with wolves. So I hope you're impressed that I know something about wolves if I answer your questions tonight. The wolf thing has, if you've been following, I'm certain you have heard all about it and read about it and followed the peaks and troughs of wolf recovery. And so I'll just jump into this program and try and hit the high points and try and move along, because I'm supposed to meet some more people here about 7:15. So anyway, there's a lot of fear being spread about wolves, and on the contrary, I have found wolves a very docile animal to work with. Me and my colleagues, and I'm talking about Ed Bangs, Doug Smith, and all the other names you heard in wolf recovery, we've crawled in their dens, we've stalked them in their rendezvous sites, we've called them in with predator calls, trying to shoot them with darts. Never once in my life was I threatened by a wolf or feared wolves. People say, what kind of gun did you carry when you worked with wolves? I never carry a gun, and if I did, it'd be for people and not wolves. But wolves have never shown any dangerous behavior in my experience to me or my colleagues. And of course, that's an actual cover off outdoor life, and this is the kind of fear that's being instilled. This fellow down in Idaho, they depict him fighting wolves with a stick. Wasn't quite that sensational if you knew the whole story. He turned his dogs loose in a bunch of wolves, and wolves don't like dogs, and they killed them. I think all of you going to college are smart enough to know that if you're doing research or looking for information, don't go to a blog. It's just full of malarkey, and of course everybody's anonymous, so nobody has to give their name, and so you don't know who you're hearing from. In Idaho, I made a mistake a couple times trying to be helpful on a blog, and I have people threatening me, and you know, they're going to take care of me, and yada yada. So I don't even chime in anymore. I just talk to intelligent people where I can. These blogs all have agendas, and if they're talking fear about wolves, there's nothing you're going to tell them on that blog that they're going to believe or change their mind about. They want to change your mind. So anyway, I'm just going to give you a brief review. Most of you probably were very, very young when we reintroduced wolves in 1995. I was on the capture team that went up there. It wasn't my idea. This was congressionally mandated. And in 1995, we did go up to Canada and brought back 66 wolves over the next, in 95 and 96. They're experimental, non-essential, that allowed some kind of flexibility in their management. And so, briefly, there's how much money has been spent. The fear planted in people's minds that this was a federal government conspiracy to take away your guns and get rid of hunting in North America. We all, or most all the guys on the team, are hunters and trappers and fishermen. And none of us did this to disarm the nation or to ruin hunting. You've all heard, you know, which wolf. They brought bigger, meaner, nastier wolves down. These are not the native wolf. For all practical purposes, they're the exact same wolf. Canis lupus. There used to be 24 subspecies. Now they recognize more like 5 subspecies. But pretty much the wolf in Minnesota, the wolf in Canada and Alaska, the wolf in the Northern Rockies, they're all the same. And so I'm retired now, and I took the liberty to rename them Canis lupus irregardless. They're here to stay, they're not going away, and you can argue all day whether they're the same one or bigger and meaner. And so, while everybody's depressed over how things are going about delisting, you know, my God, they're going to delist them, and they're going to hunt them, and they're going to kill them all. There's 1,700 wolves. That's a success story. It's a great outcome. They're here, and I absolutely believe they're here to stay. You would have to try and poison them or go out and make an effort with helicopter gunships to shoot them down and get rid of them. And so I tell people, don't be depressed, especially if you're a wolf advocate. Now, some of you are not, then you may be depressed to know there's that many out there eating all your elk. And again, there's about 111 breeding pairs. And that means a male and a female that are having pups, and the pups live till December 31st following their birth. That's sort of the definition of a breeding pair. There's also 264 packs, and so there's even more pack structures, but 111 of them we've found that are productive wolves. Again, gray wolves used to range from the Arctic Circle down to Mexico City, and they used to pretty much cover the lower 48 states, except over in the southeast where you had the Canis rufus, which is a red wolf, which I'm not going to talk about. And so bottom line, in the Northern Rockies, 1,700 wolves. Over in the Great Lakes, 700 Michigan, 700 Wisconsin, about 3,000 Minnesota. And again, those up there are all pretty much same old gray wolf. Down here in New Mexico, Arizona, the Mexican gray wolf was reintroduced. It's definitely a smaller wolf than the ones we have up north. And there's about 42 is all that they've been able to maintain in the wild in New Mexico and Arizona, and people are steadily shooting them. And those 42 are really, you know, the only Mexican wolves in the wild. And they're having a rough time down there too, because the livestock industry just does not want wolves in that region any longer. It's not a whole lot different than up here. I thought you'd enjoy this because while the government gave us an award for reintroducing wolves, not everyone looks at it the same. And this fellow here that made the comment lives over there north of Yellowstone. And in conclusion, he wants to see Ed Bangs and I and all of us put in prison for the crimes we committed against humanity, bringing these horrible animals back into this region. Wolves, real quick. Maybe I'll review to you, but it's amazing how little people do know about wolves. And I use this one in the photo because notice the truck tire. There's about the height of a wolf. They're about 32 inches at the shoulder in the flesh, and then they have fur, so they stand about 3 feet high in appearance. Notice a narrow chest. Look at a fox, coyote, wolf. They have a very narrow chest. And when you're tracking them, you'll notice how they walk in a straight line when you're following them in the forest. And that's how you can tell them pretty easily from domestic animals, because most of your dogs have a barrel chest and wide stance, and they walk differently. And so it's one of the things useful in saying, was that a wolf or was that a dog? And of course, they have the big old feet on them like snowshoes that give them an advantage over deer and elk in the winter. And one of the points I want to make again about talking about these wolves being bigger and meaner, really when you're talking about how big a wolf is, it's usually how much food are they eating. If they're eating in Yellowstone Park and they're feeding on bison and they have a lot of bison meat, the biggest wolf ever handled up until I think this year was 141 pounds. And the day that I darted them 2 wolves, that black one was the 141 pounder. It actually had probably 10 to 15 pounds of meat in its belly, so it's an exaggerated weight. The larger males usually weigh around 120, 125 pounds. And my mugger that day, by coincidence, that's Dr. David Meach. And so he was a witness and got to help weigh that one. And so anyway, talk about finding wolves. In the business I've been in, I look for wolves by tracking them on roads and trails. They're just like us. They rather take the path of least resistance. So I don't go bushwhacking up through the timber looking for their sign. I just drive the roads, ride the roads, walk the roads. And if they're around, they like to follow those. And they're lazy and they cut corners, so if I'm in a hurry and want to look for wolf sign and you want to just look on the inside curve as you're driving a Forest Service road. And if there's been a wolf there early in the morning before other traffic, they're right there in that corner. They eat deer, elk, moose, large animals, and so they have very large, enormous scats that might weigh a pound or a pound and a half. So it's very noticeable compared to coyotes, foxes, and smaller canines. Wolves love to howl. I guess you all know that. I tell people, if you want to go wolf watching or enjoy wolves at night, stay out of your hard shell camper and don't camp by the creek or the river, which everybody likes to do for the sound effects. You can't hear anything when you're there. So when I'm looking for wolves, I camp out in a tent. I get on a high ridge at night. And inevitably, if you can't get them to howl at you by imitating them yourself, sometime in the night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, if they're anywhere in hearing distance, they'll howl. That helps me find them and put a collar on one.